Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Despite their differences, one key issue all the political parties in BC agree upon is improving transit right across BC. But do you believe their election promises and what needs to be done to make it easier for everyone to get around? And coming up on our second half, we'll talk to the national president of Mothers Against Drunk Driving about the importance of talking to teens about impaired driving. I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And thank you for joining us here on radio, TV, and live stream. You can call us now on our top story, what transit improvements are needed in your area. Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call 1-800-825-5950 or just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Comment on our live TikTok stream at CBC Vancouver or email us bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, they may not agree on much, but if there's one thing BC's competing political parties seem to agree on, it's that British Columbians need more ways to get around the province. From upgraded highways, better buses, or brand new rail lines across the province, the BC NDP, Conservative Party of BC, and the BC Greens promise better ways to move you across BC. So what do you think about these campaign promises? What transit improvements are needed in your region? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell. And yes, we are live today on TikTok on CBC Vancouver and taking your comments, and email us bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, joining us now is Dennis Agar, Executive Director, Movement Metro Vancouver Transit Riders. Hi, Dennis. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Always nice to chat with you. Were you surprised to see that transit and as a whole making it easier to move around the province for people is such a uniting issue among the political parties this year?
I think the time has come for it. Yeah. I wasn't too surprised. You know, we have 1 million transit riders in Metro Vancouver. Across the province, we're one of the most transit ridingest provinces or states across the continent.
Okay.
So I think the time is here. As an advocate for it, I want to see more always, but it's a good start.
And so, sort of, at first blush, when you're kind of going through the different platforms, what do you think were some strong points? Where do you think they maybe are lacking?
I saw some exciting individual ideas, pieces. So, the Conservatives talk about extending SkyTrain to Newton and Surrey, and the NDP one talked about extending the SkyTrain to UBC, which I think is long overdue.
Right.
But they were pieces, right? Like, what I'm still looking for is a platform that isn't necessarily picking off the parts of the region that they think are swing ridings, that they're places that they can pick up. I want to see a whole regional plan and just a commitment to really changing the way we look at transit from just this kind of side thing that's like piece by piece, and more of like oh wow, we need a whole provincial transit network to survive.
And do you feel that they are sort of pandering to those areas where they need they need the vote, so they're like, oh, well, we'll toss you a promise of SkyTrain out in Chilliwack?
I think they don't rationalize every little piece, but I think if you start to ask questions about, okay, why here, why not here?
Right.
Then it kind of leads you to that conclusion.
In your work with Movement, what are some of the bigger complaints, I guess, that you do hear from people regarding transit, in Metro Vancouver or whatever area they happen to be in?
I think province-wide, we're seeing kind of an epidemic of overcrowding, right? We've had relatively high transit usage in this province. I think that's because we've had relatively high investment in transit, more than other provinces and states in some ways. But it's kind of like, okay, we did the investment, we built it, people came, now we need to do the next thing, which is to build more.
Right, to keep it moving and to have that momentum. So the BC Greens are talking about free transit for everyone. The BC NDP is promising more transit out to, Chilliwack, and expanding SkyTrain lines up to UBC and beyond. And the Conservative Party of BC is pledging the same. They're also pledging, new bridges or extra lanes on existing bridges. Do you think these promises are realistic, or is this just sort of a way to hook those voters? Is this something that, feasibly could be done?
I mean, we're nonpartisan, so we can't necessarily get too far beyond what they say in the individual platforms.
That's fair.
What I would say is that we want them to make as big promises as they can, and then we, as an organization, need to hold them to account. And in order to do that, we need to be really big, right? We need to have a long list of riders that can go to those politicians and then say, hey, you promised this, and we'll be mad if you don't. And if we're just a tiny little organization, then they won't really pay attention to us.
Right.
That's the whole kind of idea behind movement, is that we got to grow.
You got to have a movement.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to take in a couple callers now. Rosemary in Princeton. Hi, thanks for calling in to BC today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Hi.
Hi, and so what are your thoughts on transit in your area?
I don't think it exists.
Fair.
I had a really important eye appointment with an optometrist in Kelowna, and I had to have somebody drive me there and back. I wasn't able to do that. I had to cancel the appointment, and it's disappointing because I'm in my mid-70s now, so that was important. My own car is old. I won't go into all these details, but no, we do need this. This is a service we need.
And do you think that these more isolated areas, now that there's no Greyhound, have they been sort of left out on their own and aren't being factored into that bigger issue of transit and moving safely and efficiently around the province?
Yes, you said that very well. Yes, I believe that to be true.
Well, thank you for the compliment, and also thank you so much for calling in, Rosemary. And Dennis, is that something that you do hear as well? That we do see a lot of these promises maybe a bit more focused on the metro areas, whereas people that are in isolated areas such as Princeton and other rural areas aren't being factored in.
Well, I was pleased to see, I think in both the NDP and the Green platforms, this idea of a province-wide transportation network to kind of fill the gap that Greyhound left. A lot of states have this. Saskatchewan used to, and it was really exciting because they would have discounted fares for people that are taking medical trips, and you could get anywhere in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan, right? It's spread out, it's rural, but the government made sure that every town had access to each other. And I think they shut it down because of budget cuts, and it was only costing them $18 million a year to have a bus to every town in Saskatchewan on a regular basis.
That's incredible.
And it was moving cargo. It was moving freight from these small businesses and small towns that needed their goods getting to bigger markets.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we say 18 million, it sounds like an enormous number, but really when you look at transit costs, that is not, that's something that you would really even bat an eye at. It could be quite manageable. And why do you think we've never had something like that here in BC?
Historically, back to the 30s when buses were first invented, Greyhound and private companies were able to do that on a for-profit basis. But the economics of transportation has changed. And once those started getting cut a little bit, we get into this thing called the death spiral, where little cuts turn into just total collapse in the transit system. Right. And in the same way, little subsidies can turn into big growth. And we've seen that with BC Transit, with TransLink. The rural places that do have transit, there's a bus between Castlegar and Nelson. I think it's like an hour of a trip. People are getting left behind at bus stops because it's too full. And the local regional district has asked the province for funding to grow it, and it's been a real struggle to get that money from the province.
And there's obviously that need, that there's a demand, it's not going to waste, but still coming against that funding wall. I'll get a call now in from Liz in Victoria. Hi, Liz.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
No, well, thanks for calling in. What are your thoughts on, I guess, the state of transit in your area and in BC?
Well, I'm a social worker, and as part of my professional responsibility to try to improve the conditions in society that are hurting my clients and hurting other people, I'm a member of the Victoria Transit Riders Union. And we are a group of people advocating for free and excellent transit across the province. We want fares to be eliminated. A lot of people talk about that costing a lot of money, but as a social worker, I don't think of things in just a one-dimensional way. You have to cost it fully. So when we just heard that example of someone not being able to make it to a medical appointment, I've seen on the ground what it looks like when that just adds up a little bit, and then they go to the ER and they go to the ICU. And that costs a lot of money. That costs a huge amount of money and human suffering. So I just think we really need to abolish fares completely, save all the money that it costs to institute the fairs and have people have to apply for programs and get their application looked at, whether they're a low income, et cetera, et cetera. We need to see it like a library. It's a public service. It should be for everyone. And we should invest in it heavily because of all the public goods it provides in healthcare, to business, and to other areas.
Liz, I really appreciate you calling in because that's such an important component. And just when we heard, say with the BC Greens announcing they wanted free transit, that is the first thing that everybody questions. How do you get that money? But as Liz is saying, there's this holistic focus that we aren't really engaging in. Whereas, yes, money will have to pay for transit, but where else are you spending money to make up for that lack of affordable transportation for people? So Liz, I really appreciate you bringing that up. And in terms of cost for transit, is that something, maybe from your point of view and with your advocacy, is that something that gets talked about too much, that we sort of crunch the numbers a little bit too much as opposed to looking at the human cost and the human benefits to having proper transit?
Well, I've got an agenda, right? So I'm going to heartily agree with you that we scrutinize the cost of transit too much. The cost of building transit, like the cost overruns we saw at Surrey Langley SkyTrain, I think we do need to scrutinize those. But when it comes to the cost of operating transit, there's it's a bargain. I always say that it's so much cheaper than the alternative. And the alternative is not only, healthcare costs, but it's also the cost of building roads. And that's something we never scrutinize. It's never like the BC Ministry of Transportation says, oh, we've got to widen this, we've got to build that. And it costs $4 billion. And we're just like, okay, go for it.
Yeah.
Imagine if we applied the level of scrutiny to transit that we do to highways. And highways actually make congestion worse. When you widen a highway, you make congestion worse.
Yeah, and we've seen that brought up many times. There is that fallacy that people think, oh, it means that you'll move smoother. It does, in fact, invite more vehicles on the roads. But there is the argument as well, and I think we've talked about it too, where they say, if there's not enough road capacity, they can't put buses on it. So you need to build extra lanes so that you can get a bus into these more rural places. How do you feel about that?
I've heard that argument. Yeah, there aren't lots of places in the world that they just take a lane of traffic and make it into a bus lane, right? Seattle just did that with Madison Street. It's a 4-lane street, 2 in each direction, and they took 2 lanes. And it's now the center running BRT. It's almost the same speed as a SkyTrain, and it's running on the street. And they did it for a fraction of the cost. So that's the kind of thing we could do.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. Sort of when we look at what our province needs, where are the areas globally that we can look to really see effective transit and effective modes of transportation that are cost effective, are efficient for the riders, and are a benefit to society in terms of getting people where they need to be and taking vehicles off the roads?
I mean, pretty much any city that you like to visit, right? Like people often come back from vacation and they go, oh, transit was so good there.
Yeah.
Almost everywhere, right? Like
it is something that people typically be like, you wouldn't believe how easy it was to get around. I've done that myself. And I live in Vancouver. I'm very privileged to have the SkyTrain and buses very close to where I live. But yeah, you do see that everywhere. Yeah. Why do we struggle with that here so much in BC?
I think we struggle with public services in general, right? Like it's always a fight to expand the role that government plays in our lives, and it's always comes down to that culture war. But we have to make it a priority, right? It's not a mystery. We just need to fund it. And the good news is actually that once you get good at it, it becomes cheaper. Spain, a lot of people love going to Spain, and they're like, oh, transit's great in Madrid. It costs them a quarter the amount to build subways as it does here. And they've just learned how to do it really well. And there are people in Canada working on how do we get those lessons from Spain over here so that we can get 4 times as much rail for our budget. So there's lots of upside to really just going all in on it. And like I say, we save all that money that we would have had to spend on big freeways and that are, tearing through communities.
Right.
We wouldn't have to do that anymore.
Right. And that infrastructure, of course, it takes a lot of maintenance. There's a lot of work and issues that come up with the new bridges and roads that we have. What do you make of sort of there is a lot of talk about widening, existing bridges, new routes up towards, say, the Sea to Sky or out into the Fraser Valley and the Okanagan. Does it frustrate you that there's still that focus on building bigger and more when we should be looking at what goes on those existing infrastructure routes?
I know it's my job to just communicate with people. Like, it seems like common sense, the idea that if you widen a highway, there'll be less congestion. But you look at Houston, you look at Los Angeles, you look at Toronto, who have gone down that road, and they're like, doesn't really work. So we just have to keep kind of preaching the gospel that highways make traffic worse, and that, we can make a better choice.
Okay. We've got a few more calls I'd like to bring in. Jack from Ashcroft. Hi, Jack.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I believe we didn't get quite enough time with you before, so we've brought you back on.
Thank you. Yes, I had to do the elevator speech, so I'm not.
And now you can expand on your thoughts.
Sure, where we left off. And I guess maybe I'll start by saying again that I represent an agency that runs 2 small rural transit systems in the interior.
Okay.
And I guess maybe start by saying that the distinction between, a larger city, whether it be a Kelowna or Victoria, is, it's an economies of scale issue. You have dense populations, you have corridors that people get on to go to work, to go to school. And that becomes your model, because you want to move people around. Mm-hmm. In the rural areas, there's not that density, and yet there's large geographical areas. So moving, and yet there's a demand because of people's needs. They're low income, they're isolated seniors, et cetera. So it becomes a very kind of a different sort of model that you have to really, I guess, know the lay of the land and know the communities to be able to deliver these kinds of systems. And we've been very successful. We were actually, the system in the Gold Trail was virtually at the verge of collapse, and we were asked to take it over. We did, and they were suddenly, they had money in their coffers, and we were very proud of ourselves. So we've been doing this for quite some time now, 25 to 30 years. We've been operating this one system and then the second system. Okay. And so what we were advised was, very arbitrarily, was that, the contract is going to go out to a tender in the fall. Now, they've since backed off of that, and you're going to be lumped in with a larger center. And we have a lot of experience in these kinds of things when governments talk about regionalization, centralization, organizational restructuring. We know in the smaller towns that this means a loss of services. There's just no way around it. To have somebody that has no familiarity with an area, because one of the things, whether it be a contract for housing or mental health, which we have, we deliver those services. Governments look for people that are attached to the community. They have presence. They're well known. They know the community. And in this case, they're going to be looking to a large multinational to say, okay, you're going to provide services here, and we know just from experience that this becomes a death of 1,000 cuts. Right. And it's just one piece after another, and not to mention the fact that we're quite nimble and lean, and right from the get-go to sort of mirror the level of service that we provide. Well, there's no doubt there will be an increase to the local taxpayer. And again, this is something that we're speaking to our councils about. They're very aware of it, and they're very upset about the fact that there was no consultation. And I can understand how that would be frustrating. And I'm sorry to cut you off again. We do have limited time, and I do want to get to one more caller. So, Jack, thank you for letting us touch base with you again. And Kathleen and Prince Rupert, I want to get your point of view as well on this issue.
Oh, there's lots to talk about.
I'm sure there is.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. I'll try to be quick, too. I belong to the Transport Action BC group, and it's one more public group that is concerned about
the large number of roads and the lack of public transportation in the province and how it could be better. Here in Prince Rupert, we can get out by train, by the health bus, by a little regional bus we're grateful for that goes and comes to Terrace for us, but it's as if these agencies don't talk to each other. For example, on Monday, you can come west on Via Rail, the BC Health Bus, and the Northern Health Bus from Prince George to Prince Rupert. But on Tuesdays, you can't get anywhere except to Terrace and back, which is, we're grateful for that.
Sure,
These
but
agencies don't talk to each other. I will also say years ago, I sent a regional, like I was just writing as a citizen, I sent a regional letter to the MLAs in this more northern part of the province. And John Rustad, I will say, years ago, was the only one that answered me. So it was on his mind to answer a citizen's request. But if somebody wants to look up what we've done here, I'm just randomly looking at my March 28th, 24 Northern View newspaper, and we put an ad in about eastbound and westbound, and basically it's the schedule, so you don't have to go on the computer. You can phone all these agencies. You can phone Via Rail. You can phone the Friendship House. You can phone, we've got the number for BC Ferries and what was, as far as I know, the Haida Gwaii Transit number also. So people really, I think, are also ready for ways of getting around, but we want to know how to get around, and
right.
that's another problem.
There needs
too.
to be
I
more.
will say,
Kathleen, I'm going to have to leave it there for Kathleen, I'm so sorry. We will have to leave it there for today, but I really appreciate it because that is such an important part of it is the communication and the lack of that. Dennis, are you feeling hopeful?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, that's a nice way to feel.
We're growing. I mean, it's been so easy. I started movement a year ago. It's been so easy to get any kind of traction. I mean, I'm on TV with you, right?
Right.
I think there's a million transit riders in Metro Vancouver, plenty more in BC. So it's just a matter, we have to raise our voice. Politicians are used to hearing from motorists, so we need to shift that balance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Dennis Agar, Executive Director of Movement, Metro Vancouver Transit Riders. It is 12:27. You're listening to BC Today. And now that all parties have announced their election platforms, you weighed in with your thoughts. Lisa writes, lots of these sound good, but let's remember they are promises and some aren't feasible. Example, free transit. I think that would cost far too much to implement. I am totally against making apartment owners rent to pet owners. Many of us have chosen pet-free apartment buildings because we have allergies. I haven't heard any party say that they would ensure that the senior safer for rent assistance would work. Place the availability higher to folks making less than $40,000 and make the assistance match the high cost of rent. And I would love it if seniors or people who make less than $40,000 could claim their rent on income tax. Samuel says, I'm still unsure who I will vote for in BC's election, but I will say this, the cost of living in BC has become so unaffordable that we've completely given up on BC and decided to move to another more affordable province. BC Liberals contributed to this problem. Federal Liberals made it even worse thanks to Justin Trudeau's bad leadership. Only option now is to leave BC. Leadership at all levels have completely dropped the ball, so it's time for a change. Definitely will not vote for Conservatives at the provincial level because they started this problem. Only solution is Green or NDP, but NDP has done such a poor job with homelessness. It was good to see EB say something about involuntary care because now we're at the point where it's necessary to help the people in the streets because they can't help themselves, and leaving them there is more cruel than to take them into care. We're all in a bad spot. And Katie says, I wholeheartedly agree with funding free transit. While we don't live in the Lower Mainland, I believe in this strategy of creating more equity, possibly more access for potential workers, and avoiding to attract more cars through funding and new highways. Thank you to you all. This is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, YouTube at CBC Vancouver, and on the CBC News app. The news with Robert Zimmerman is next.
Good afternoon. David Eby announced that if the NDP is re-elected, it would double the speculation and vacancy tax for homeowners who leave their home vacant. The tax would rise to 1% for Canadians and to 3% for non-Canadians. Eby says 99% of British Columbians are exempt from paying the tax. Vancouver police say more officers will be brought in to prepare for October 7th, the one-year anniversary of the Hamas attacks on Israel. Chief Constable Adam Palmer says he knows there's unease for people of Jewish and Muslim faith, and they are hoping to provide reassurance. He says in the past year, tensions have increased and there have been too many instances of disorder. And 2 earthquakes struck in parts of BC this morning. The first was magnitude 3.5 and shook just after 2 a.m. in the Georgia Strait, about 18 kilometers west of Tawasin. The second quake, a magnitude 4.6, happened at around 4 this morning, about 63 kilometers west of Fort St. John. No damage or injuries have been reported. And now the forecast on the north coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 12, highs up to 5 with periods of rain in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a high of 10 with periods of rain and a risk of thunderstorms. Highs up to 17 with a chance of showers in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, mainly cloudy with a high of 15. And more rain this afternoon in the Fraser Valley, a chance of showers in Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria with highs around 16. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Rob. Now, I know it wasn't tennis weather this morning for you, but
Excuse me.
it's brightening up out there. Are you
Yes.
feeling a bit better about the outlook?
I am, Amy,
Okay.
always.
You're going
when
to be
it's
hitting the
brightening
tennis
up.
courts?
I was thinking about it, yes.
Figured you were.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome.
And lots more on the day's top stories on the afternoon shows in your region. Here in Metro Vancouver, here is what's coming up on the coast.
It's Gloria Makarenko here, and coming up this afternoon on the Coast, we'll have more information about the city of Burnaby signing this $20 million deal with Trans Mountain Corporation that prohibits the municipality and the company from communicating unfavorably about each other to the public. We'll talk about that with Duff Conacher of Democracy Watch. We'll also look at some of the major BC election issues through an Indigenous lens. And Adrian Sheed, the owner of the Muay Thai Academy, is going to be here to talk about the international distinction for some local Muay Thai instructors. So I hope you can join us between 3 and 6 for On the Coast.
Thank you very much, Gloria. And you can, of course, watch or listen on the Coast on CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver and anywhere on the CBC News app. The group Mothers Against Drunk Driving is trying to promote responsible driving among young people and raise awareness about drug and alcohol-impaired driving. Road crashes remain a leading cause of death among Canadian youth, with alcohol, cannabis, and other drugs a factor. The MAD program is called One Last Dance. It's presented to grades 7 to 12 students. And so we're asking you, have you had a talk with your child about impaired driving or alcohol or drug consumption? Has impaired driving impacted you or your loved ones? And does this issue still need more attention? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. We're live on TikTok on CBC Vancouver and taking your comments. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Tanya Hansen-Pratt is the national president for MAD Canada national president. Good afternoon, Tanya. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you're in town for MAD's Western Conference. How big of an issue is impaired driving still in this country?
People are still dying and are being injured on our roads every single day, and impaired driving remains one of the leading criminal causes of death in this country. So, I, not to sound like a Debbie Downer, but it's still an issue that we absolutely have to address. We've been saying this messaging for decades now,
Hmm.
and it is getting out there, and there has been gradual decreases in alcohol impaired driving, but it still exists and it is still a major factor on our roads.
And and why is it still so pervasive? I mean, I grew up being, told the dangers of drunk driving at the time or impaired driving, and I have impressed this on my children. And yet there are still people I know of my age that will make that choice to get behind the wheel, and it terrifies me to think that there are people my children's age that, now that they're able to drive, will make that same choice. Where is that disconnect?
Right. And I think some of it comes from just attitudes. A lot of the attitude toward impaired driving is that in public, it's wrong. And we know to say that it's wrong, but in practice, it's still pretty socially acceptable to have a few drinks and get behind the wheel. And now that cannabis has been legalized,
Hmm.
it's certainly an issue seeing people consume cannabis and get behind the wheel. And then the combination of the two is just infinitely worse. So the attitude change where we take the public perception and then have to deal with the social perception are very different things. And that's where we have to get the messaging to people.
And how much of an issue, I guess, is this sort of legalization of cannabis been for your organization? Because I admit it always was typically the focus on drinking and driving, but this has become much more acceptable and perhaps something people don't consider to be impaired.
Exactly. You'll often hear people say, well, I'm a much better driver after I've had cannabis, which is not the case. There is absolutely no literature out there that supports that.
Mm.
And in fact, there's plenty of literature to disprove that people are obviously poorer drivers when they consume cannabis or alcohol. And certainly when they combine the two, it has very disastrous consequences.
Mm.
With legalization, we've seen an uptick in impaired driving due to drug impaired driving. But some of that may be because we're looking for it more. Cannabis didn't just suddenly become a thing in Canada when it became legalized. It just became legalized, but
Right.
it's always been here. It's always been an issue.
Mm.
Um, so now that it's become legalized, a lot of the police departments across the country have mobilized and um, trained their police officers in detecting drug impaired drivers. They have the tools available to them to scan drivers for drugs and to do those tests legally at roadside, and to be able to take them back to the police department and do a proper test there. So there are a lot of tools available now that weren't available in the past, so that you can argue, is it legalization or is it the fact that we have more tools and we're catching more people?
Exactly.
Either way, they're still out there on the road, and it's a problem that needs to be addressed.
And how did you become involved with MAD?
Unfortunately, I am a victim of impaired driving. My mom, Burl Hansen, was out for her morning walk on April 20th, 1999, and she never came home. She was struck by a young man named Stuart. He was 19 years old. He'd been
Mm.
consuming cannabis and alcohol all night long, and struck her at about 150 kilometers an hour on a Tuesday morning. So impaired driving isn't something that happens on the weekend. It can be any time of day, any day of the week.
I'm
And that's something our family learned firsthand.
I'm so sorry for the loss of your mother, and for you to turn that into having such a positive impact is incredibly inspiring. So thank you for that. Um, Turning to Matt, how important is it, to get that message to young people that we instill this in them right from a very young age?
It's incredibly important because young people, as we all know, we've all been there, young people don't necessarily think things through in the moment. So to have that messaging early on, so that this is something that is front of mind for them when they're in these types of social situations, they will remember to make a plan ahead of time. We're not telling anyone that they cannot drink. We're not telling anyone that they cannot consume cannabis or other drugs. That's not our mandate. Our mandate is to tell people that if you are going to consume, you need to make a plan ahead of time so that you can get home safely. There's always a way to get home safely. And so this messaging that we have in the school program really reaches them where they are. And we use actors their age, we use language that they use, and it really meets them where they are so that they can understand this message in a way that doesn't talk down to them, right? It isn't a lecture so much as sharing a story from other people their age.
And we do keep hearing that younger people aren't interested in drinking alcohol. Is there a bit of a cultural shift here?
I think so. And I think just speaking as a mother, I have 3 teenagers myself, and they're really not that interested. And I think back to my young days when I was their age, it was very prevalent. I grew up in the country, and everyone would go partying every weekend, or a lot of kids did, and that's not something that they're terribly interested in. And same with their friend groups. So I that gives me a lot of hope. But that's not to say that it doesn't exist. And certainly, drug impaired driving again is quite prevalent. So that messaging still needs to get out that if they are consuming cannabis or combining it with alcohol, that's extremely dangerous. And the social attitudes still persist that if they consume cannabis, it makes them a better driver. And that just simply isn't the case.
And interesting, because we were talking about this off air prior to the show, and I have teenagers as well, and similar to you, my teenage years were far different in terms of the drinking culture than them. I wonder though, with that shying away from alcohol, but then also a lot of them choosing not to drive and relying on transit. Is there any danger that we will forget to have such a push to remind them of the dangers of drinking and driving, that can sort of lull a parent into thinking they don't have to be on them about this so much?
Exactly. Yeah, we can't be lulled into that sense of security, right? And that's why this message is still being put out there to young people. Even though we see a shift in attitudes, we can't stop with the messaging because we can't rest on our laurels, so to speak, and just assume that it's going to get better and stay better. We have to keep up with that messaging so that they pass it along to the next generation saying, you know what, this isn't okay. And we still have those social attitudes out there that even though they hear the message and they know logically in person to say, no, impaired driving is wrong, we still see that people are doing it and being caught regularly. Driving impaired, people are still dying on our roads, people are still being injured every single day. And so we know the behavior still exists.
Okay. I'd like to get a call in now from Susan in Delta. Hi, Susan. What are your thoughts on impaired driving?
I think that, like the last lady was saying, that it's still going on. And I, witnessed coming home late at night in a taxi, seeing someone in a little smart car, and he says either she's on her phone or she's really drunk, right? And then we kind of go, okay, what do we do instantly? Like, what do we do? Should we phone the police? And anyway, she turned off, and he says, I see this all the time. And I also, know that, I've been to places and people have a few drinks or, and then they get out and drive. And I was just saying, whenever I go out, I take a cab there and a cab back. And it's not, it's expensive, but a lot of people can afford it. And people that can afford it don't do it. And it's like a lot of things. Like, I was just telling the producer that, I'll go for a walk and I'll see a whole pile of garbage on the ground. Like, we're taught this as young, right?
Right.
and we're taught drinking and driving as young. I mean, I'm older, and we knew we weren't supposed to do it, but now there's been so much talk about it, and people still do it. So I don't know what to do. I would put lots of roadblocks on every night, not just Christmas.
Right. Just have that strict enforcement. Susan, thank you for that call. And it can be frustrating when we've all heard the same messages since we were very young, and you do still see people, disregarding that messaging. A couple of messages from TikTok. Marbrek says we need a 0 alcohol level for drivers. And Cassandra agrees, and it's true that many of today's youth don't want to drive. But tell me more about the program, the One Last Dance for the students. Tell me what it entails, Tanya, and why it is still so important.
Well, I think the biggest part of the school program is that it is starring young actors. So it's not just people my age preaching to a group of high school students, right? They'll see the screen and they'll see young people in situations that they could possibly be in themselves, whether it be at a friend's house, in their own home, at school, at any type of event that they might go to themselves, and they'll see themselves reflected on that screen. We use young actors, diverse actors, so they'll be able to see something that they can really identify with, and kids using language that they understand. So there's a lot of value in presenting something that is their own, rather than something from someone like me that's just lecturing them, right? I know if I lecture my kids, their ears turn off. But as soon as their friends say it, their friends could say the exact same thing, same words. Suddenly it's the gospel truth, right?
Yeah.
So we use people their age using their language, talking to them in a way that they can really identify with. And I think that makes all the difference, because they can hear it that way. And then we go through some questions and answers, and it's always very engaging. We always find that the students are very, very engaged in the presentations.
And this program does target grades 7 to 12, and the majority of them aren't able to drive or drink. So why is it so important to really impress this on them when they are young?
Because they need to know that before they ever get behind the wheel. If we impress this on them early, by the time they are learning to drive, it's already a message that they've heard over and over again, and they've taken it to heart, we hope, right? If they hear that message after they've already started to drive, it may very well be too late. They've already developed those attitudes. You know, as soon as they get their driver's license, the moment they have it in their hands, we all develop those bad habits as drivers, right?
Right.
Where you're kind of rolling through stop signs, where things they would never do on a driver's test or with their instructor in the car, right? So if we're developing those good habits before they've even set foot in a vehicle, we know statistically they're going to abide by them a lot better than if they had heard that messaging after the fact.
And we're going to take in a call now from Tony in Abbotsford. Hi, Tony. What has your experience been with impaired driving, or if it's had an impact in your life?
Well, it's very fresh right now. Just 10 days ago, my granddaughter and 3 other friends were involved in a major accident.
Oh.
A lone car accident. Her girlfriend was drinking and driving. They're all teenagers. And one of the boys was half ejected out of the vehicle. He's got serious medical issues because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt.
Oh, my goodness. I'm so sorry,
this is really
Tony.
fresh on my mind. Now, these kids have grown up with that messaging, okay, in their high school in Abbotsford. These kids know that you never drink and drive.
Right.
Yet here they are. Okay. So what else can we do? You know, except keep reinforcing that. Like, do you have flyers all over your high schools and all that? Are there posters that are posted in high schools, in hallways and all that? that part of your messaging?
Tanya.
We have literature available. The high schools are certainly welcome to put up any of our literature. But one suggestion I might have for you, Tony, is that I was talking earlier about attitudes, and the first word that I heard, you said accident. You actually said it twice, and that actually brings the hairs up on my neck a little bit, because when we say the word accident, we're suggesting that no one was to blame.
Right.
But when the driver is impaired, we know that the driver is to blame, especially if they've heard that messaging before. They know what they're doing is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm so glad everyone is still here, and I'm sorry this happened. And I think moving forward, what we can do is start with just changing those little words in our language that suggest that this is an accident, that suggest that no one is to blame.
No,
because that will
exactly.
really help to adjust those social ideas that we have around impaired driving. If we take the word accident away and I just replace it with the word crash.
Right.
There was a crash.
A collision.
Someone was to blame. Yeah, a collision. Somebody was to blame for that. And take that word accident away, because that just keeps perpetuating this attitude that no one's to blame.
Right. And how should parents maybe have these conversations? When is the right time? Is it, I'm so thankful for Tony that his family and her friends are all safe. But when we hear about a crash like this, is that when we should sort of say, hey, like this just happened? How can we make sure you're not in that position? Or is it too late then? Do we need to get into those open discussions far sooner?
Absolutely. Those discussions are important, but as parents, one of the best things that we can do is to set a good example.
Mm-hmm.
When we're going out and we know there's going to be alcohol or perhaps there's other drugs available, tell the kids what your plan is. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going out with friends and we have a designated driver. We know that person is only going to be drinking water or pop all night long, and we're going to get home safely,
Mm-hmm.
kids. We're going to do everything we can to get home to you safely. Maybe if we're not having a designated driver, maybe we're going to take a taxi or an Uber or the bus. Maybe we're going to sleep over. But let your kids know what your plan is so that you are setting a great example for them so they know they can do the same.
Sometimes it's not about drinking yourself and getting behind the wheel. It's about getting into a vehicle with someone who has been drinking. What advice can you give parents, about how they can handle this discussion and this situation?
Well, again, one rule that I have with my children is that they can always call us
Mm-hmm.
any time of day or night, no questions asked, and we'll come get them. They are not ever to put themselves in a position where they have to get into a vehicle with an impaired driver. So no matter what, no matter where, no matter what time they call us, we'll come get them.
Mm-hmm.
We may have to talk about it another time later, right? There's
Yeah.
another important discussion that has to happen later. But in the moment, no anger, no questions, I'll come get you.
Yeah.
And they've had to draw that card before, and
Mm-hmm.
we come get them.
Yeah.
No questions asked. So those types of conversations can happen with parents, that there's no reason that you need to put yourself in that position. I will make sure I'm your safe space and I'll come get you.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe there's another friend or family member that can be available for them. So the key here is to plan ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure that kids have those tools with them at all times, so they know, okay, if I'm going to be in this situation, here's what I do. I have an Uber app on my phone. I have the number for a taxi company. I have bus fare I hide it in my shoe so I don't spend it, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of things that you can do. Have a plan ahead of time and encourage kids. There's good news here that you can get home safely,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't have to be a tragic story, and there's lots we can do to make it a happy ending.
And sort of tying in, I guess, in a way to our first half of the show, we were just talking about transit, across our province here, and how in those more remote and rural areas, there isn't that option for people. They don't have the option of hopping a bus. They maybe don't have access to Uber or to taxis that can come and get them. How do we sort of address that? Is there a different way to address it, I suppose, is the question, depending on if you were, in a rural area, if you're in a big city? And do we see those rates, perhaps, those rates of youth driving impaired, is it sometimes higher in those areas where they're lacking those available services?
Sometimes, yeah, I think the numbers would certainly indicate that. But I grew up in the country, and I don't think there's any excuse. Even if we don't have Uber or taxis or buses,
Right.
there's always a way to plan ahead. You can certainly have a designated driver. My friends and I used to call my best friend's grandmother, and she would come pick us up. So if you're not afraid of being embarrassed by someone's grandma come picking you up,
Bless her,
it's doable. Yeah, she was awesome. And you can plan ahead. There's always a way to get home safely.
Right.
So if anyone says, well, I live in the country, there's no way for me to do it, that I disagree. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Manitoba. There's always a way to get home. You just have to plan ahead.
Thank you for saying that. And we've got time for one more quick call from Sue in White Rock. Hi, Sue. Hi, Sue, are you there? Oh, looks like we may have lost Sue, but I think she was just calling in to talk about her experience. Sue, are you there now?
I'm still here.
Hi, and what has your experience been with any impaired driving? Sue, are you there? Okay, we'll have to leave it there. We're having a few technical issues, but Tanya, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, for talking about such an important topic, and of course, one is the mother of teens that I take very, very seriously, and I wish you all the best here for the conference and with the program going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. That was Tanya Hansen-Pratt. She is the national president for MAD Canada. And that is it for our show today. Thank you for calling in and joining the discussion. You can always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca.